the love which transcends the law represents the fullness of our being. It doesn't eclipse the necessary steps. Well, welcome everyone to, I guess it's our Valentine's Day service. I'm not sure what it is, but we'll call it that. I want to thank Christy and a few others we had a lovely program last evening of chanting and readings and offering at the Ananda community in honor of Divine Mother and pure divine love. And that is as it should be. You know, in our language, just thinking, listening to, I don't know where she disappeared to, but listening to Vahini with her lovely Italian accent. I can't understand a word she said, but it just sounds so perfect in any case. But I think in our language, you know, the word love carries a big burden. You know, it's not like Eskimos and the words for snow. I was thinking in Greek they have fairly nuanced terms, you know. They have eros for sexual love and agape for universal love, philia, like in Philadelphia, for friendship, philautia for self-love, and ludos for something I don't understand, which is playful love. I guess I don't know what that is, but anyway, they have a bunch of words, in other words. But it's a process, you know. In our Raja course in the last few weeks, we've been talking about what is the process by which we mature. And I love that definition that Swami Kriyananda gives for the word mature, which he gives in the book for our Living Wisdom School. He defines maturity as the ability to include in our realities the realities of others. And I like to joke, as most of you know, that we start off practicing tantrum yoga. And somebody in the course, by the way, sent me a little thing. You probably don't know who Swami Beyondananda is, but I do. And apparently I stole his term tantrum yoga from him. I had forgotten about that, of course. And so she reminded me where I got that. But you know, we start off with the love of a child for its mother, father, and so on. But our love has to grow and expand. The purpose of human love is to expand that love until we know the perfect love of God. I was born into a family of 5 children. Is that how you say it? Anyway, 5 children in my family, 4 boys and 1 girl. And of the 4 boys, 1 became and remains a Catholic priest, and the other 3 of us married our high school sweethearts. And of that, which is pretty rare, although I know a few other people my age who did that successfully, but I did not. And of the 3 of us who did, only 1 has survived to this day. And I remember how once I finished my college education and paid my dues, as one sometimes does, I had a deep yearning to go back to my spiritual inclinations and aspirations, but that wasn't something that that particular marriage was going to support. So I sold everything and biffed off to Europe and then onwards by car to India in my search. But after I ran out of money, which is what happens when you do that at age 25, right? I had to come back. But I was in fear of the temptation to fall for what Paramahansa Yogananda quaintly called a pretty shade of lipstick. And I was done with that as far as I was concerned, but I knew that human weakness being what it was, I lived in a certain amount of fear getting off that airplane in San Francisco from New Delhi. But you know what? Within what amounted to practically days, I met Padma, the Rock of Gibraltar, and a no-nonsense devotee. God answered my prayer literally and figuratively. I don't know where I would be if it hadn't been for that event. Life has so many twists and turns. In fact, every Valentine's Day, she reminds me that our being together, our partnership, was so obvious, at least to me, that I forgot to propose to her. And every Valentine's Day, she reminds me that I overlooked that particular ritual. I think it's too late, but... Actually, what I proposed to her was a partnership. We went into business together before we were married in near Nevada City, near Ananda Village, which had just lost all of our homes in a fire. And so we had to move or to live. There wasn't any place to live at Ananda Village, so we had to rent a little love cottage in Nevada City. And after a pretty short time, we had about 40 members living in Nevada City, about half hour from the village community, while things were being rebuilt. And we even bought a little church for our programs. We bought an old house, and we called it the garage. It was 100 years old, the garage of the eternal religion. And it was there that I gave my first talk and this sort of thing. Anyway, those were the days, huh? And then, of course, along came the kids, and the rest was downhill. But, no, just kidding. But those are the processes that we go through. Yogananda recommended to people, and we do in our training of new members at Ananda Village, that two things. One, that we seek the joy of God, because especially as a new devotee, the love of God too quickly and too easily finds its more accustomed course. And in the first year of people's training there at Ananda Village, we advise people not to fall in love. But, advising people not to fall in love is like advising the sun not to rise. It just sort of happens. And human nature is what it is. And we have to learn, I won't say the hard way, we just have to learn the natural way by which our maturity grows and embraces a larger reality. In Yogananda's interpretations of the life of Jesus, and we quote here, Moses brought the law and Jesus Christ brought grace and truth. And it's good to understand the process by which we grow. I mean, there's nothing we can do that we do well without having to learn the basics, okay? Although it reminds me of a conversation reported by Mozart, who was once asked, well, how should I, somebody asked him, how should I, become a composer? And so Mozart gave him the steps, you start with little pieces of music, I don't really know all the terms, and then you advance to eventually symphonies and operas, I guess. But then this person looked at Mozart and said, but you didn't do that. And Mozart said, I didn't have to ask the question. But for most of us, whether it's in our profession or whether it's in learning the laws of relationships the hard way usually, right? We just have to learn the rules. To do anything in our modern society, you need to be get a certificate. You have to learn how it works. But achieving that self-mastery, you might say, or to whatever degree we do, then we can soar. And presumably it was the love that drew us into that particular relationship, that particular career maybe, and so forth. When God created the world, it must have been they say this universe was created with a big bang. And I think he had a big bang. When I have a creative idea, one that Padma doesn't say to me, some of your ideas are better than others, but when I have a good idea, there's joy that comes when you make something with your hands, or you write poetry, or whatever you do. With creativity, there's always joy. Now I'll tell you a little secret. When our first born was conceived, we both knew it in that very moment. Now, I don't know if that's medically valid or not. I don't really care, because I believe in other forms of knowledge. And so in every act of creativity, there is joy. It doesn't mean it's easy necessarily to make something or to establish something and so on. But there is joy in creativity. The Big Bang, if you will, is part of life. We have inherited that desire to create, that desire to give, that desire to love. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Now, I know the dogmatic interpretation of that, but the metaphysical interpretation of that is that within each atom of creation, dowered with individuality, within each heart, is that Christ. Is that yearning for perfection, that yearning for the perfect love of God. You know, in that understanding of that process, you know, Swami Kriyananda writes, based on Yogananda's teachings, that, you know, the poor Jews, they've had a tough time, you know, when you think back about it. But they were, you remember the story of Joseph, the beloved son with the beautiful coat, and his brothers were so jealous, remember that? That they tried to throw him down a well, didn't they, or something like that? But anyway, they had sold him to some traders, and the traders took him to Egypt, and then he became the Pharaoh's right-hand guy, remember that? And then there was a great famine in Palestine, or whatever they called it back then, and so the brothers came and later brought the father, I guess Jacob, right, to Egypt. Well, it turns out, if you know your history of the Jews, you know that for 400 years they lived in Egypt. And at first they prospered mightily, but after that Pharaoh kicked the bucket. Maybe pharaohs don't do that, but anyway, after he died and they put him in a pyramid probably, things didn't go so well. And so for hundreds of years they were more or less treated as slaves, and they were crying for freedom, weren't they, when Moses came along. Also the Pharaoh's right-hand man, if you remember the story. That itself has an interesting interpretation. We're not going to go there right now. In any case, so they were eventually freed by Moses. And Yogananda said Moses was a Christ-like savior. He was a prophet. And so he brought them out of captivity. And then after that, those rascal, hard-hearted Jews, remember Jesus was a Jew, so he said it, not me, they got taken off into Babylon. And they had all these troubles because, at least according to the narrative they give us, they would periodically disobey God's many commandments, all right? So Moses brought them out of captivity, and through Moses he channeled to them, here is how you must live, to live in communion and attunement with your God, okay? And so they had to live by the law, and that became their self-definition. Jesus said he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. He came as God incarnate into human form to show them that God could be known, that God could be loved. Okay? And I guess we'd have to say that that didn't go over so well, did it? And so it was that only 40 years maybe, after his crucifixion, General Titus of the Roman army destroyed Jerusalem and laid siege to the city and captured thousands of Jews, of which there were hundreds of Christians by that point, 40 years, and dragged them off to Italy, to, what was that volcano, Vesuvius, Herculaneum, and whatever that other town was. What was it called?
Pompeii?
Yeah, right. And so so the Christians got dragged off, and General Titus became the emperor. And so it is that as Christianity began to grow and flourish, the love of God through Jesus Christ, the so-called Son of God, was their watchword. But now the time has come. Yogananda came from the East to say, how can we establish and have a personal perception and direct perception of God within ourselves? The second coming of Christ, he said, was the awakening of that Christ consciousness in our own hearts. And so you see, in this little narrative is the process by which we learn and grow. We attune ourselves, whether it's diet, relationship, or career, we've got to learn, we've got to pay our dues, as I like to say. We have to learn how it works. But the purpose of that is to achieve the communion, you might say the union, the love, that is the driver for us to begin with. You know, in our Raja course, just the other day, we did the yamas, right? And I was thinking about that. Each of the yamas, each of the so-called, well, there's actually 10 of them, 5 don'ts and 5 do's, and it's not unlike the commandments, but it's not really a commandment. It's a description of the natural awakening, the natural maturity of human consciousness. And so you think of something like harmlessness, ahimsa. Well, harmlessness, when perfected, becomes oneness. You think of asteya, which is non-greed and so forth, and it becomes centeredness, contentment. You become self-sufficient emotionally and psychologically. You think of brahmacharya, flowing with the spirit, instead of seeking the lesser, temporary, fleeting pleasures of the senses, you find the great pleasure of flowing in the creative flow of spirit. And you think of, what's another one? How many here did I say? So anyway, I know there's at least one other, aparigraha, which is non-attachment. And with non-attachment, we realize who we truly are. That process, described by Patanjali as the very first stage of our awakening, is the law. It's not that love is above the law in one sense. The law is necessary to reach the love, which is transcendent. Now, in the great flow of Brahma and the great flow of grace and intuition and creativity, like taking a great artist, and a great artist in all the different forms of art can break the laws of his art, her art, based on that inspiration. But that's sort of a different story. We become, as Swami Kriyananda said, the more we live in attunement with grace, we live by that grace. We live by that intuition. The lesser rights and duties mentioned here, I love that beautiful quote from the Bhagavad Gita. Let go of those rights and duties. It's not permission to do what some of us might want to do, which is maybe not meditate, maybe not this, that, and the other thing. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying that when we are free in the Spirit, then we are guided by the Spirit. And so it is that the great heroes and heroines of life in all walks of life, whether it be, politics like a Mahatma Gandhi or in any great walk, the geniuses of life go by inspiration. That's how we want to live. We mustn't be arrogant and proud and so forth to imagine we're there already. Okay, humility. Humility is the basis for our growth. That's one of the laws, the commandments, if you will. Absolutely. And of course, as we get a little bit of inspiration, we come out of our seclusion and with all these hot ideas, and then I have to ask Padma, I share with Padma those hot ideas from my seclusion, and she says, some of them are better than others. And so, in other words, we go up, we go down. This is how life works. And without the basis in openness and receptivity and humility, we're just going to fall further. Let's put it that way. We're going to fall anyway. And what does that teach us? That teaches us compassion for others. Others who rise and then fall. Because that's what we do as well. It just enforces, or affirms, I should say, our own fellowship with all life. All life, birth, life, death. And so we recognize that. But the more we are centered in the flow of that divine love, the flow of that divine joy, the flow of that divine inspiration, the more we live transcendently. And that's the path that's been offered to humanity at this time in our history. Because otherwise all the laws, represented also by all the dogmas and the self-affirming rituals and even all the politics and all the things that separate human beings, put us on the brink of destruction because we have the power to self-destruct. And so what's offered to us is a path towards transcendence in all walks of life. It's manifested as we seek to do in our work of communities, intentional communities, through cooperation rather than competition. Simplicity rather than, I don't know what the complexity of consumerism and that sort of getting yours first kind of consciousness. And so a new wave, a new dispensation, a new thought form. Well, nothing's new, but for our culture and for our times, rather than call it new, we'll call it necessary. Necessary for our own heart's awakening, but necessary even outwardly for our survival as a race and our survival as a planet, in fact. And this is cause for great rejoicing. The path of yoga, meaning the path of withdrawing life force into our center and discovering who we truly are, which is our only mission in life, to know who am I. That's why that very famous question in the New Testament, who do men say I am? That's the question of all times, forever and in all times, past, present, and future. This is the truth that will make us free. And so the love which transcends the law represents the fullness. I came to fulfill the law, the fullness of our being. It doesn't eclipse the necessary steps to get there. So when we celebrate Valentine's Day, for all the craziness that it is and all the things that it represents to so many people, let us at least celebrate the love that has given birth to all life. Signore mio altissimo, la mia vita